in a town that is somehow coming back to life. The streets are full. On the other hand, everybody's very, very nervous, and it feels like a little interruption in a civil war where you say, can I go out on the streets or not, or will I get shot? We are very concerned, of course, of the new viruses that are coming around, and it puts everything again in question. This fall, as you all know, we focus on writers, on thinkers of theater who have used the time of Corona to put things into word, to put it into a form, publish it, getting it out. And today we have a very, very significant talk. I feel we have with us two guests from Europe, and it is Avra, who comes here with her book, Staging 21st Century Tragedies, Theater, Politics, and Global Crisis. And she comes with Frank here, who is based at the Humboldt University, who contributed one chapter, but a very significant one, and one that really asks us to question everything and to realize the moment we are in, mankind is in, planet Earth is in, because he very strongly feels, as so many others, something is shifting, is changing. We are entering a new age. Very few words about my two friends, but first of all, guys, where are you? What time is it? Where are you now? How are you doing? Avra.
Well, I am actually in Nicosia in Cyprus, and it's 7 p.m.
And I'm
wow, Frank?
Berlin, and we have 6 o'clock p.m.
6 o'clock. Well, it's evening time there, and perhaps they are a little bit ahead of us. And looking at this book that Avra put together with 20 collaborators, she collected essays and also a play, actually here from New York, from Karamelpit, and thinkers. It's quite significant, and perhaps it's closer to the future than to in the present, and no longer in a way in a past that they claim, and both say, perhaps something is behind us and we have to face it. Avra Sidiropoulou is the Associate Professor of Theater at the Open University of Cyprus, and she's also the Artistic Director. She is a director also of the Athens-based Persona Theater Company, and she is the author of Directions for Directing Theater and Method, and authoring Performance, the Director in Contemporary Theater. This also is of significance. Both of them are thinkers. They write theory, but they also work professionally in the theater and produce, create, and put plays together. Frank Raddatz is a German publicist and dramaturg. He wrote about the great Herder Müller as his dissertation, and published on aesthetics and drama theory. He was the editor of the very important Theater der Zeit Verlag, the publishing house in Berlin. He worked for Lettres Internationales, perhaps one of the leading, some even claim the leading intellectual magazine that only exists actually in print. And he has taught at many universities. And right now he is the Humboldt University, where he created, together with Antje Boetius and Sabine Kunst, and we come to that later, the Theater of the Anthropocene, a center dedicated to the research of man and nature, somehow in relation to the very great Alexander Humboldt. Both of you, thank you for being here. And how does it feel? How are things going in Greece and in Berlin at the moment?
Well, if I may start, well, first of all, thank you so much for having us here today. It is amazing to be part of the Segal Talks. This is the third time that I'm joining this very reputable and meaningful series of talks where people actually share their insights about this ongoing pandemic, but not just the pandemic, about theater and how it feels to be placed in a world that is surrounded by crisis. And it is a very important thing for me today to be able to present this book on crisis, which I think on a personal level kind of helped me survive the coronavirus pandemic. Things are a little better, or were a little better until very recently in Greece and Cyprus. and theaters have been fully operational, which is amazing. Nobody knows what's going to happen from now on with the new variant circulating all over the world, and when this really huge crisis of health is going to finally abate. But we'll see.
Yeah,
We're hopeful.
we'll see. How is it in Berlin, Frank? How does it feel? What's the theater doing?
The theater is waiting for the next shutdown, and because everybody is waiting for Omicron variant, but we have a new government. That's very important. There's a Green Party in this government. There will be some changes in environmental politics, and I think this is a sign that there is a big shift in connection with this Anthropocene, and it's just starting, and this will be a very long debate. This is not only a question that we stop with gasoline cars or something like this, because what is in the air today will be there in 120 years. So we are in a process which is about for many or for some generations, and perhaps needs 200, 300 years. And this is a big challenge. And I think behind all these discussions on the surface, there is a fear which is connected, because everybody knows in the world now that there is something dangerous with this ecological threatened horizons.
Yeah, it is a real moment of change, of terror. And I feel that all our talks, I feel, are significant, important. This one, again, I think, is one of these theoretical talks we had with Milo Rau, or Florian Malzak, or Carol Martin, Thomas Oberender, Frédéric Aitui, and the question really is, in this new age, in this new planetary age, Frank, as you call it, the age of the Anthropocene, how do we do theater? How do we react? What makes sense in this age that we are entering? We are realizing that our species is not only part of a historical process, as you write, but also part of the history of planet Earth. The planet does not lead us humans, but we do need the non-human life, the plants, the animals, and with Latour and others, you say, we have to change our perspective. National borders, don't mean anything in the face of Corona. We are in a new age. And Avra's work, where she said, let me use the time to ask my friends and collaborate with people I admire to collect essays, to saying, how do we stage this crisis? She calls it a theater of crisis. She's a crisis theorist, if we say it right. How can we look from different viewpoints and create an analysis of performance, of dramaturgy, of scholarly work and artistic work from different groups, different continents, but also different approaches? What does it mean to stage? And is the theater of crisis, how is it connected to the Attic, the ancient tragedies? So this is a very, very important theme. I think it's right in the middle of what we have to think about. So Avra, maybe start with you. The term crisis, and you write about it. What does it mean?
Well, it is a very dangerous and slippery term, and we have to be very, very careful how to use it. But it is essentially a characteristic of the modern times. It is connected to conflict, it is connected to rupture, it is connected to change. And it forces us, in a sense, to look back to the past and interpret this past and look forward to the future and find a way to channel our responses to what is happening to us politically, socially, in a way that is meaningful for human beings and in a way that makes the world a better place. So there is a very long conversation on how crisis has also been appropriated by different political parties, by all kinds of media formations that use it to create a state of alarm that is not necessarily always warranted. But in a sense, crisis is something that gives us the opportunity to assess the world we live in and create and try to produce paradigms of a better world. And this is what the book deals about from the perspective of the performing arts and how theater can become that lens that evaluates the moment of time we're in, and how we can use this moment of time and our perspective about it to think about our world, think about our planet, and create choices for us and for the people around us and for communities that can make life better.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to pin it down.
Sure. The entire book won't answer it. But also, you mentioned it. You said often people think tragedies seem dated. They seem obsolete. You are looking at it closely. What is your answer?
Well, tragedy has a double meaning. It is both an ontological and an ontological phenomenon, and a cultural and artistic phenomenon. And I think crisis theater, the way I see crisis theater today, 21st century crisis theater, is very much connected to the idea of the tragic, because we are going through tragic times. Crisis is intertwined with tragedy, but at the same time, the theater of crisis actually has created forms that are very much akin to what Attic tragedy gave us, in the sense of a chorus and a community of people taking a stance. What I think may feel more obsolete about the Attic form has to do more about how the plot is constructed, more or less the idea of a noble hero that goes through a transformation, the idea that there is an explanation for what is happening to us, divine agency and so forth. We are really past that stage in the world we live in, but we can very much use the structures of the communal essence of Attic tragedy to inform the theater practices of the 21st century, so that they become political again.
Yeah, and it really does have a place, but we have to look at it carefully and redefine it. It's no longer enough to put on a white linen, or it never was, a white linen sheet and say, I'm doing a Greek play. We have to examine what it is about, as Schechner did with Dionysus in 69, and actually Frank is asking us to reevaluate, to look again at the idea of the Dionysian. But Frank, before we come to that, if I understand right, with many others, you say we are in a radical moment of transformation on planet Earth, as societies, and in our own personal lives. We are too close, perhaps, to really realize it. The Holocene, the idea of the mankind that from hunter-gatherer, learned to, with long spears, you write about it, to hunt in groups, imitated the predators they were afraid of, and became this incredible species that invented the steam engine and the telephone and rockets. But this idea of that Holocene is in a way now coming to an end, and we have to look at the world in a different way, in the idea of that very new age of the Anthropocene that is entering us. Corona, in a way, points out that we are in a global context, in a global sphere. We have to live in it, understand it. And you say theater has an important part to play. So tell us about that center you created at Humboldt University. Actually, was the president of the Humboldt University. Just imagine NYU or Columbia, the president creates a theater center and participates, and together with a marine biologist. So tell us, what is the theater of the Anthropocene? What's your idea?
Okay. I was working as a dramaturg at the Berliner Ensemble tour years ago with Frank Kastorf and Jürgen Holt. And then I have talking with about the responsibility of science in a little way with the Brechtian theater. Galilei, we have made Galilei. And in this moment, we are talking with this marine biologist, Antiopoetius, who is an Arctic researcher, and she has the dream that the theater can help her because she has the experience that her voice is not strong enough to reach the people. And then this idea was to connect art, theater, and science under this premise of the Anthropocene. And in the following month and now 2 years, we make some productions, theater productions about the forest, Requiem for a Forest. It's a montage principle, or another is called Critters, like Donna Haraway is speaking about critters, about the animals in the soil. Or we have now a project of scientists of 3 Berlin universities about the future of water in the area of Berlin. And we have to create an artistic framework for this, so that there is a collaboration now more usually between natural science and theater. And this was 5 or 4 or 3 years ago was not thinkable. And the best, or the climax was we make with Alexander Eisenach as a director at the Volksbühne the Oedipus tragedy, but we called it Anthropos Tyrann, Oedipus. And then Antiopoetius is going on stage, and she is a modern seer. She is reading the future of mankind from a ice bore core, yeah, and of course you can see, okay, for 800 years ago, 800,000 years ago, we have this in these conditions, and then the water is 5 meters higher than today, and so she can make extrapolations and bring it to the future. So we have a very strong connection between old ancient idea of interpreting the future, and now this modern scientists in the same situation, they must give us warnings because they have simulation satellites, and can say, okay, this will very bad development. And this is for a new point of view, and there are new combinations now. And I never had thought that in my life I want to bring scientists on stage, but it works, and it's important.
Yeah, and it works so well. I think you got the Nestroy Prize. It's a very prestigious prize in Europe of the best best production in German-speaking countries for your work, Anthropos Tyrann, Oedipus. So a rework.
Re-nominated.
Or you're nominated for it, but it's just, that's a stunning achievement. That's something coming out of a university in collaboration with a great established theater and a visionary director. Avra, I don't know if you saw it, the Oedipus from Frank.
No, unfortunately, no.
But you say something is changing in also in the idea of tragedy, if I understood right, that tragedy used to be in Nietzsche's sense also that you see the human suffering on stage, all the mistakes we make, but ultimately it's life affirming, and you celebrate it. But you say, actually, we in a perpetual state, where we're repeating and don't seem to come out. So that is tragedy giving us a contemporary tragedy. Is that a new message? Is there a new way to think about it?
Well, In a sense, I mean, yes, tragedy used to be life-affirming, and I'm not sure it can be that at this moment in time. But what we get from tragedy is the sense of communal suffering. I think this is what 21st century tragedy is about, that it is not about the fate of one individual, but it is mostly about how it all comes together in a world that is relevant to all of us. So what happens to me is affecting the way that you live, is affecting the way that people outside of our small circle of friends lives. It is all about globalization, and communal suffering is the suffering of the entire globe at this moment in time. And I think this is where tragedy and crisis intersect, in that they create a structure where everything is and feels interconnected, that nothing can be standing on its own anymore, that every plight, every crisis, every conflict in the world will eventually get to you and me at the end, will not leave anybody unaffected. And it has become very, very clear with the COVID pandemic, when at the beginning of it all, we thought it was mainly, isolated in a part of the world that is quite removed from where we are, speaking as a European, and then it infiltrated our lives in the most devastating way. In a way, if you can talk about a silver lining, is that it made us all think that unless we act together, we are in for very, very big troubles from now on. And of course, climate change is it's the major calamity and the next big crisis that is awaiting us around the corner. And again, it is teaching us that we have to take collective action. It's not something that one person can solve. It's not Oedipus's riddle to solve, or a politician's way to move forward. It's a way for people to come together and make collective decisions. And I think that's what makes contemporary tragedy, in a way, diverge from the more ancient forms of it.
And still adapting, if I understand right, in the Anthropos, Tyrann Oedipus, Oedipus is us realizing that he has been blind to what he has done to nature, the rape, the killing, and how do you deal with that contemporary tragedy of an environmental destruction, a devastation of a landscape, like in Fukushima. We're going to have Aiko, the great dancer, with us next week. We will talk about her repeated travels to that landscape and how she engages with it. Frank, you say that what's called, quoting Latour, the Gaia hypothesis, Gaia, the mother of all, that Greek idea of it, is at the center of this, and the planet Earth has to be the object of observation, the center of everything that should happen in the theater of Anthropocene. So how do you connect that idea of a global view, which is a new one? That famous photograph the American astronauts took of planet Earth, the most significant image of the 20th century. Many say that kind of a planetary view. How do you connect that in what you call the rudimentary organon for the theater of the Anthropocene with Brecht? Where can theater come in, and what does it need to do?
Okay, so many questions now. The first point is, I think that now we are entering this planetary age, yes, because everything what we are doing now as a mankind refers to the planet and his reactions to our actions. He's answering. He's not dead anymore. In the reading of the Bible, of the nature, is it's a non-speaking material, yes, but it's not a non-speaking material anymore, and therefore it's like in the old Greek ancient time that the Gaia, the planet, the nature is responding, and now we have to learn to articulate what we want, but to react, to see what is the reaction. And we see some things are, some actions of mankind are not possible anymore. So in this framework, Michel Serres says, okay, the nature is behaving like a subject. Yeah, there is now a subject. Okay, and then we say, okay, we have subjects on the stage, but these are always humans. Yeah, there's theater is something between humans and humans, and therefore we cannot bring it on the stage. But then I say, okay, well, I was thinking about what is the beginning of theater? Yes, and this beginning of theater in the tragedy and the origins before are dealing with nature. There are dancing in the spring. Dionysus is someone who can change in an animal. Yes, the Dionysian ceremonies are in the springtime when the greening, the god of the theater is the god for the greening of the trees too, his responsibility, and he is dying. He's the only god who is dying because in the autumn the nature is dying. So we are with the theater very, very close at this planetary rhythm. The Dionysian is a planetary effect, or express this planetary effect, which is working year for year. And not because mankind is doing some work and say, okay, nature, let's go, we have to work. Nature does it, and mankind in the old theater times of tragedy is improving it with ceremonies on a symbolic field. So, and there we have a point we can connect now. We can say, okay, we have to think how we can this origins of theater bring in our global times.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also point out, there's a shamanistic element, in indigenous communities that actually did see their individual life or the life of their tribe not disconnected from the plants or the animals. It is actually something very, very ancient. You quote Claude Lévi-Strauss, who points out that if you bring out the dead, the resurrection of the dead, that Heiner Müller vision of theater, that they bring the dead out, but they also give something back to them.
Yeah. With this new age, or with this step we have to do, this has epistemic consequences. Yeah, this means when we see there is a forest and it's a resource, it's an object, then we can deal with it, cut the trees and sell them, and so everything, what we are doing every day. But when we say, no, it's an affective power, it's a quasi-subject, like Latour said, then we see, okay, this impact of the forest have an impact on the global climate, and this for the US, for China, for Europe, but it can be located in Arizona, not in Arizona, in Amazonia, in Brasilia. Yeah, so we see it's the same thing. If you say it's an object or it's an affective power, is very, very different. And when we say it's an affective power or something like this quasi-subject, it's like in a muse. Yeah, it's working. It has a soul. It's connected in another way, like an object. So there is an epistemical revolution now with this Anthropocene. And of course, this is for the philosophy of history, the same thing. We are not more in the history of progress. We are not in the end of the history. We are in an absolutely new history, which is not following the logic of progress and the logic of the last 100 or 200 years with all these inventions. And we have to find out what logic is working now, and how we can have moral ideas, because we have in Europe, as example, making all these diffusions in the air, but we have impacts in Africa or in other parts of the world which have no industry. So these are now the connections between different cultures in a very, how to say, not in a linear way. So,
yeah. So I'm very impressed by that connection you also make with, in a way, resurrecting the dead. Is it, as Hahnemuller said, that we should get the dead out on stage and then they go back after the performance. The concern for the unborn, for the future life, and the planetary view. That is really something of significance, and it is overriding, personal ambitions. I think now, theaters putting out new plays, to compete with others. We are facing a most serious crisis, and theater has to react. Avra, that's how also I read your book. You do ask the question: how does theater represent social and political transformation on stage? And what are the new forms and revised norms, you write, of artistic expression? You quote, you have Ostermeyer, I think, Rabbi Murray. Tell a little bit, where do you see it manifesting on stage?
Well, to respond to what Frank was saying about this different logic, I think there is something in progress not being linear, but becoming more of a cyclical thing and reconnecting us to the roots, which I think is also in the heart of interpreting tradition, but also looking to a way of taking future action. And I think that's very much what's happening in political theater, if you can call it political theater, a theater that carries a social and political consciousness today. It is, we often see that a lot of the new productions that deal with the political experience or the experience of communities are actually based on Greek tragedies. And we see a lot of that in Rimini Protocol's work. For example, I'm off the top of my head, Prometheus in Athens was this kind of project that brought 103 citizens of Athens on stage to talk about their experience of the Greek crisis at the time when it was staged. I think it was 2010, so at the peak of the crisis. So there is a sense that we are both, we're balancing between the interpretation of history and tradition and revising the form to lead us towards a new dramaturgy of the commons, a dramaturgy where the audiences can participate, but also the experience on stage is asking questions rather than providing definitive answers. So we always seem to end with question marks. And I think that is a very different idea of dramaturgy than the one that used to prevail until, well, say, the end of the 20th century, where things came to an end. So it is a little bit, I think, a way of connecting the Greeks with Beckett's understanding of cycle and cyclical time and time never ending, and things being perpetuated until we find a solution to make them move forward. But it is all about participation, I think, and it is about a different understanding of time as something that is ongoing and something that is connecting past with present and future. I don't know if I'm exactly answering. It's something that I'm grappling with, but
you also wrote that productions appear that are independent of the source's textual format. You say productions give rise to tragic experiences in a way that proves to be independent of the story of the written. tragedy. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that sometimes the text is a pretext, and what happens around the text and how the actors embody their own experience of loss becomes more important than the words themselves. In my chapter, I talk about Borborygmus, a project that really fascinated me when I watched it in Berlin in 2019 by Rabbi Mrouet and his collaborators, which is all about a collective experience of loss and devastation. And it is based on the text that these three creators, Majdalani, Rouet, and Kerbatz, put together. But after the text, the experience of being connected to the sounds they made, the music they played, irrespective and aside from the words they spoke, became so resonant that you didn't really care about the words as much, but you cared about these three people standing up front and sharing moments of extreme personal and political and historical and communal tragedy. So this is sort of the thing that I'm getting at, that it can no longer be about one person's story, that different stories connect to make a collective history on stage, a history that concerns all of us. And it is a political statement, in fact.
Yeah. As a question, I think Carol Martin, she wrote about Milo Rao, about La Reprise, I think, and she quotes Hannah Arendt and who said, "Tragedy requires sorrow, not anger." Question to both of you: what is the what is the tone of what is the tone of the tragedies? How do they work in that idea? Frank, you also quote Brecht, and said, we have to learn from him. You very beginning of your essay, you talk about Galileo, that great play where science and theater is together, but now we have to also move on. How should a tragedy approach it? What do you think works?
No, I can answer it with very, very right. With Brecht, we have a scientific theater. Yes, this was his idea, to make theater for scientific, the children of the scientific age or something. With the Anthropocene, we have a scientific theater too, but for the children of the side effects of the scientific age or something like this. So, and now we can see what is the difference, and we have to explore this. And there is now a connection between tragedy and science. And this is very new for us, because before we separate all these problems, the myths there and the knowledge, the scientific knowledge on the other side. And now we are in a situation to combine these two grammars of science and of art or theater to create a new form, a new construction of a scientific tragedy or something like this, where we have the both moments. We have scientific thinking, and we are thinking in this myth categories of this, what Latour is called quasi-subject. Yeah, it's like a subject. The Earth is like a subject. Of course, it's not really a subject. You can not phone him or phone the Earth or something like this. But this is now the challenge for the artist to create this new language for the humans. On the one side, Avra said it very nice about my text. It's like the polis and the wilderness, and now we have the technosphere and the planet, and we have to bring it together, that it don't exploding us. And then I wanted to talk another aspect, if I may. We have now a new role, yes, a new role, because before we was the actor, we was the kings of the earth, yes, 2,000 years or whatever. But now we are not only the kings, we are Atlas, Yes, this man who have to put the sky on his shoulders, because we are responsible for the balance of spheres now. And this is an absolutely new double role, and we don't know in the moment how to fulfill it, yeah, and how we should shape it. Yeah? But it's our time now.
Avra, before you also the follow-up question, how important is it that it happens at the Humboldt University? You know, someone who also was maybe one of the first to say everything is connected to everything. Nature is a system. The invention of nature, some say, go back to him. He created also the Uranian Theater der Wissenschaften, a theater for the science. Are you reconnecting to that old German idea of the enlightenment of theater and science? How do you connect to Humboldt University?
Yeah, I have some courses there, and I will give lectures, but I'm working together with some of the scientists. There are scientist networks, and for the scientists, it's a very, very new situation. Yes, I asked some speaker of some network of scientists, was an artist before me was here and speaking with you, and he was thinking about this, and then he said, yeah, there was someone who was a theologue, yeah, and so he was not really differentiating between an artist and other types of interpreting not scientific viewpoints on the world. So it's there. I have some basement, and of course, it's very, very much easier if you want to make such a scientific theater. Let's say in a new type, and you can work together with scientists, and you are close to them. When you are not, when the theater is only a free stage in a free scene, free off scene or something. So we get impact from the scientists, we give them impact, and we try find out ways to collaborate. Yeah, there are in the first with Antiopoetus, she's very simple. She wants to tell the people what she knows. Yes, she was something like we call it Wissenschaftsvermittlung share this information.
Familiarization on science, yeah.
Yeah. And then there are other scientists who want that the people are speaking about their themes. Example about the water, and then we have to invent new forms of theater to communicate with the people, because science is not the solution, but it's a very, very important tool, and we must, as a society, find the solution. Yes, the science will us not give the solution, but science will us say what will happen, what is possible, what is probably happening in the next 20 years if we go this way.
If we go this way, yeah, we have to adapt, or we will perish. And the question is, how do we perform knowledge? How does knowledge feel like, and how does it feel like to perform knowledge? Avra, you also direct, and coming back, how do you feel? How does this theater of the Anthropocene, where in a way we can locate also your work, this book, you are part of that movement, in your own work on others, what works? What do you think? Is it anger? Is it sorrow? Is it logical Apollonian arguments? Is it Dionysian ecstasy? What do you feel?
I think it's about connection and finding always a way to relate to everyone in the room, including your collaborators, including obviously the audience, but also outside of the room, including the world and bringing the world in. So I think we can only, I mean, personally, I believe that the only way to make theater that is actually speaking to other people is to connect to your thoughts and communicate your thoughts in ways that relate to other people's pain. So it's not about the isolated incident. It's not about your story. It's about everyone else. So what I think works is to also bring people from different disciplines together. I believe a lot in, creating forms that borrow from science, that borrow from technology. Because this is the world we live in. It feels that everything is experienced at the same time. Everything is about simultaneous experiences and consciousness. So you need to have all of that in the room with you, whether it is the visual arts and technology and text and, physicality coming together. You really cannot leave certain aspects of life aside. And that's why theater becomes more and more participatory in a way that it is not just, having immersive spectacles where you include necessarily the audiences in what you make, but you include different experiences that have little to do with literature, as in text, have little to do with movement, but have everything to do with how we experience fragmentation in our daily lives. So yes, observe the world and bring the world into the room and recreate this experience for your audiences and for your artists and the people you work with. Leave nothing to chance and leave nothing outside. Include, I would say. That would be the word. Connect and include.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you quote Lehmann, Hans-Thies Lehmann, who said it's a tragedy is a figuration of transgression, and it separates the possible from the impossible. How transgressive should it be? We have rebellion, extinction, the urgency which you both are realizing in your work. How can it really be put on a stage? How does that work? What are you looking for? I think you're going to stage Karen Malpe's work, who you also the play you chose to include in the volume. Why did you choose this, and how are you planning to stage it?
Wow. So the play is called Troi II, and it is a pandemic play in the sense that it was written during the pandemic, but it also brought different forms of crisis together. It was about the BLM movement. It was about the pandemic. It was about what the New York, but the world at large was experiencing these past 2 years. So yes, it's a good question, Frank. I think I would like to bring the world into the play in some sense, because the play is based on or is inspired by the Trojan women, the Euripides tragedy. And it's in a very, very poetic way, it connects tradition and the lyricism and the clarity of thought of the Greeks to the chaos, the experience of chaos that is very much prevalent in our times. So it plays with different discourses and different languages. We're going to use a lot of technology to try and simulate the sense of fragmentation that technology has brought to our lives. But also the idea of speed that is very, very much at odds with how our natural impulse to slow down and find that clarity that the Greeks were always looking for is about. What we're going to try and do is connect those two worlds of the past, the remote past, and the knowledge and the wisdom that past, or interpreting that past, can give us, with the frenetic rhythm and the violence that we've been experiencing recently in politics, in our physical health situation, the violence that has been around us, and try to see if there is a way to find some enlightenment in this, bridging of the past with the present. I'm very much looking forward to it. It is a question of, getting the people together, and we're thinking of working with people from the community as well, and not just professional actors, but working with students and working with frontline medical workers, just to see how the city is represented and approximate this idea of the demos that was so powerful and dominant in Greek tragedy.
Wow, so the polis, the city, is part of the production, is part of the creation. So it's not just looking at it, it is and part of it. So in the local, is a little bit more universal, as is the global sphere. Frank, also a question for you. When you worked with Alexander Eisenach as a dramaturg for Anthropos to run Oedipus, what did you guys talk about? What was new? What was the difference if, let's say, you had done it with Heiner Müller 20 years ago or 30? What is new? What you brought in from that idea of the theater of the Anthropocene? Tell us a bit about your work, your rehearsal work.
There's 2 points. The one point is that I bring this anthropoethicist, this Arctic researcher, with me, and I say to Alexander, okay, I will come when when you can put her on stage. So he was a little bit surprised by this idea between his very good actors to have this sign speak. And the other point is the viewpoint. You must know that Alexander Eisenach writes very much scenes. He's overwriting the old text from Sophocles. And so he has very much talking with us and with Fabricius, and he brings all this in his writings, yes? So there is a new type of text which will not exist in this form without our talkings. Yeah. So, but the question is, perhaps you want to know or to ask how we deal with this themes, with this old tragedies. I don't know. I only can say we have a new viewpoint on this. And we must understand that what we are talking about, and you're speaking about the deaths and Heiner Müller, and that, as example, I bring a text from Gilgamesh in another production, and this Gilgamesh is 5,000 or 6,000 years old text material, and I have read it a very long time ago. Heiner Müller don't read it, but Robert Wilson make a play about it, something like this.
The Forest, yeah.
Yeah, The Forest, yes.
Where I was actually in as an actor, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great, congratulations. Yeah. And I don't understand this problem of Gilgamesh. They are going to kill the spirit of the forest, yes? This was the story, Umbaba, the spirit of the forest. And now, 5,000 or 6,000 years later, in this connection of the Anthropocene, in this framework of the Anthropocene, this viewpoint, I understand, okay, there it starts, yeah? It starts, and there the people are talking about it, and they are thinking about it. And now, 6,000 years later, we are speaking about the function of the forest, and we have to make campaigns to save the nature or Amazonia or whatever. So this is that we see how the viewpoint changes on the history, on the material, on the text, and how it's very important for us to have these old roots, to understand our history and the history of mankind, how it navigates into this Anthropocene, because we don't want to have it, this Anthropocene, we want to navigate out, but probably we need 500 or 300 years.
Yeah.
And then I think, okay, a theater or an art which will be relevant, yeah, has to deal with the problems of the time. Yes, and it has to look in this abyss of the time. And this Anthropocene is a very threatening dystopian challenge, yes, for everyone. And now theater has to think how we can deal, your questions, that's how we can deal, and we must find it out, and we must find it out in a global conversation. We can make it from our viewpoint alone. So I bring perhaps a shiny singer in, singing about a tree, or we have text from Alexander von Humboldt, but from Jean Mouir, who makes this national reservoirs with Theodore Roosevelt. I not really know this. And so
Yeah.
it's very important to bring it in a global framework of a global culture, because we have to change this culture. Therefore, we have to communicate. Yeah, you say the same, the thing that climate is not stopping at the borders, at the national borders. Of course, yes, and therefore we need new ways of communication. We are not one mankind, but we have the same problem all over the planet Earth. Yeah, and we only can solve it together, I think. Yes,
Yeah.
This is a new situation, really new situation. And we need very much construction thinking, artistic research, and inventions. And we don't know the way, but we must find it.
We must find it. Yeah. And I think the Corona shock is so great because we are living now in that new age. It affected everyone. Globally, it was a shutdown. Globally, all theaters were closed, something that has never happened. And we have to find answers. You also quote Bruno Latour and his significant work. I like the Thomas Oberender project, Down to Earth, which he named after this. You also mentioned it, where they said, let's do outside productions, without electricity. How can we do an exhibition or a play about our catastrophic situation, but we have the air conditioning running and the electricity and the computers. So maybe this was one idea I thought is great. We are thinking about maybe doing something in New York City parks next summer to invite also such productions. But the real question is, how can it be done? And there will be lots of flowers, I guess, on the meadow that will be trying it. And as someone, I think Anne Cattaneo mentioned in her book, she said, I like the idea of springs, of birds flying in early spring, that there will be lots of approaches. Avra, you collected 20 voices. I know we dedicated a lot of time to you guys, but you guys are here, and Brecht said, build the house with the stones you have. And I thought that was important, of course, to have you here. But maybe give us a little insight. What are the other contributions you thought they are so significant? I would like to include them in my book.
Thank you, Frank. I'm very, very pleased to do so. If you can allow me to read from my notes, just to do justice to all the chapters,
yes.
I will be very brief, but
okay.
I don't want to leave anybody out. All right, so some chapters analyze the theoretical underpinnings of crisis as reflected in the subject matter of 21st century plays. The volume opens by Jana Merson's Tragedy and Crisis, staging forced displacement and its reluctant hero, which explores the theatrical devices that theater uses to approximate the reality of forced displacement off stage to the one evoked as fiction or otherwise on stage. Ana Fernandez Caparrós in her essay...
And this is, just to say, she has Annie Baker in there, right? And Lynn Nottage, two writers.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, the one I'm going to discuss, Jana uses 3 examples of plays
but that's
and
fine.
fiction, but that's, yes. So Ana Fernandez Caparrós, in her essay, Tragic and Post-Tragic Representations of Precarity in 21st Century US Drama, Fractured Togetherness in Lynn Nottage's Sweat and Annie Baker's The Flick, uses the notion of precarity, which conceptualizes a novel condition stemming from a distinctive phase of capitalist development associated with neoliberalism, to examine two major Pulitzer Prize-winning American plays that summon workers' lives onto the stage and engage with precarity in different ways. Konstantina Sidiropoulou, a colleague from Greece, delves into some of the prevailing themes and formal aspects of contemporary Greek dramaturgy. Her chapter is entitled How Many More Thousands of Years? Dystopia, Otherness, and the Greek Crisis in the Work of Three Contemporary Greek Dramatists. This work covers a wide range of topics linked to the Greek crisis, such as unemployment and the dire working conditions, the large inflow of refugees followed by outbursts of nationalism, poverty and social inequalities, violence and state corruption. There is a wonderful chapter, Modern African Drama in Crisis, two African authors in search of identity, by three co-authors, Taigu Afolabi, Stephen Ogenaruro Okbadah, and Ogag Mark One, which engages the notion of crisis to explore ways in which contemporary 21st century African playwrights are grappling with prevailing ontological realities on the continent. The essay argues that one preoccupation of theatre of crisis is a continuous question around identity, power, and finding voices to speak out within neoliberal realities. Now, two of the book's essays trace how popular plays of the dramatic canon are renegotiated through the lens of crisis. One of them is Living the World Good or Living a Better World by Aldo Milochnic, which analyzes Brecht's response to the social and economic crisis during the transition from the 1920s to the 1930s, concentrating on St. John of the Stockyards, and then focuses on a potential post-Brechtian response to the present, a time which is defined by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as economic, ecological, and global disasters. Silvia Bigliacci's Caesar Must Not Die, Italian Political Caesars in the New Millennium, discusses the possible ways for Italian theatre to approach the topic of Caesar and Caesarism via Shakespeare in the new millennium, when a widespread right-wing resurgence once again raises questions of hegemonic crisis, collective forms of intolerance, and a need for strong authoritarian leadership. Other academic essays elaborate on the work of directors and theatre ensembles for whom crisis is not just a prevalent thematic concern, but is also compositionally present in the mise-en-scène. In Prophets Needed, 5 Easy Pieces and La Reprise, Histoire du Théâtre by Milo Rau, Carol Martin discusses how Swiss director Milo Rau's modern tragedies reject the off-stage violence and heroic protagonists with fated outcomes typical of Greek tragedy. Rau revisits tragedies' rising tensions, climax, catharsis, unified plot and resolution, but unlike Aristotle's tragic hero of noble character, his tragic protagonists, argues Martin, are common men and women enmeshed in a tragic mythos with endless mutations, and there is no suspension of disbelief, no catharsis. Treating Milo Rau's work from a different perspective, Freddy de Cruz's chapter, Theatre Remains Traditionalist and Eurocentric, about Milo Rau's theatre of crisis, examines the principles upon which Rau's political activism is based, while asking why Rau succeeds in giving new meaning to the tragic climate that hangs over recent times. I've spoken a little bit about my
and
chapter.
To interrupt, he has this term of global realism, right? Which is very interesting. That he said what is emerging is a global realism, you know, Carol Martin's idea of the theater of the real, but this kind of idea of a global realism. Milo Rau just staged in Switzerland, I think, another, just this week, you know, another trial against the Swiss company exploiting Congo and the huge data lag at which World News, came into it. But go on, yeah.
So I talked a little bit about my chapter, Beyond Suffering or Resolution, Tragedy in the 21st Century Collective Experience, which reads forms of theater practice through the lens of modern tragedy, both evoking and reformulating the Aristotelian sense of tragic. My chapter draws on Thomas Ostermeyer's production of Edouard Louis' History of Violence and on Borborygmus, that I talked about by Rabih Mrouet. And it looks at modern tragedy as a performative form that reveals the, quote, apprehension of a common human vulnerability, and this is quoting, obviously, Judith Butler, and stimulates an awareness of the social and ideological context that aggrandizes it. The volume's emphasis on theater-making processes that articulate major global calamities from within, and on the performance of crisis as an experience in which the audience can partake, I talked a little bit about that, is made manifest in the discussion of contemporary performances of protests and resistance, which may be indebted to tragedy. In Marca España, Making Theater from Precarity, State Violence and Fiesta, Ana Contreras analyzes the aesthetic paradigms regarding themes, forms and artistic processes that emerged in Spain after the 15M revolt of 2011, and sets out to relate an overview of Spanish theater in the last decade from feminist, decolonial and anti-capitalist perspectives and a geopolitical delocalized position. In Theatre's Assembly, Radical Dramaturgy in Theatre Commons, Uchino Tadashi introduces Florian Malzacher's notion of theatre as assembly, and then goes on to look into an alternative Japanese form of this concept, in which, after a complete neoliberalization and depoliticization of the cultural sphere, the more humane kind of exploration has been emerging. Now, I have to say that I'm really indebted to all our international collaborators, because they brought this global perspective to the volume. And we have people from Lebanon to China, Germany, Venezuela, Spain, Greece, the United States, both academics and artists that came together to give us, their own perception of how the world feels in their part of the world.
No. And in a way, it is also, what Frank writes about, the planetary view, what you also have there in that book. It's a planetary view, as our Segal talks, in a way. We're a planetary view, on the state of the world, the Weltzustand.
I was actually quite inspired by the talks, and believe it or not, they did help me formulate the structure of the book in a significant way. So thank you.
Thank you.
But I will say that a little bit about our artists, collaborators. And I will start with Hanan Haj Ali, who is an award-winning activist from Lebanon. In Cards of Identities, Poetic Luxury, she uses a first-person narrative perspective to illuminate profound issues of national and political identity that continue to challenge artists and citizens of a country severely affected by manifold and prolonged crises. In a different chapter, IV of a Country's Living History, Lupe Gerenbeck, an author and director from Venezuela, poetically traces the way in which her engagement with the theater communities in her native Caracas has consistently addressed some of the country's relentless social and political predicaments. So again, there is a very strong coming together of politics with the artistic
she was at the
voice.
Segal Center. We once had her as a guest.
And then there is an interview that I had the joy of conducting with Daniel Wetzel, founding member of Rimini Protocol, that interrogates the interweaving of the artistic with the political. Wetzel elaborates on socially and politically minded work that often enters the public sphere and celebrates an openly agonistic agenda, manifesting notably participatory, immersive, and, of course, documentary practices. In Chorus and Crisis in the Contemporary United States, Peter Campbell discusses three of his recent works that address the political potential of contemporary choruses, as they both embrace and reject the virtuality of the masses that dominate our mediated world. And he looks at contemporary crises of collective voice and the diminishing of a politically viable contemporary polis. Anestis Azaz, a theatre practitioner from Greece, and Su Xiaogang, a Beijing-based actor and director, talk us through the challenges of creating theatre during the COVID-19 pandemic in Theatre in COVID Times, a report from Greece, and All Is Related to Me, respectively. Following a visionary approach, Miguel Rojo and Javier Hernando of the Spanish ensemble Los Bárbaros have compiled a list of imaginary plays that could help us process the anxiety and loss incurred as a result of the pandemic in an essay entitled Plays, parenthesis, We Didn't Do to Survive a Worldwide Crisis. Of course, Frank's chapter that brings to the fore the crisis of the environment has been, I hope, adequately analyzed here. And finally, the collection's Farewell Peace and the poignant nod to the future of humanity is Karen Malpete's original short pandemic play, Troi II, that I also talked about, which illustrates the interconnectedness of modern crises, COVID, climate, and racism. And this is what the book is about. And of course, I put everything into a very concise form, but it is beautiful to see how all these people who were suffering at the time when the book was being created gave their unique voice and really walked us through very different forms of crisis that all felt totally connected in the end. And I'm grateful to them. I'm grateful to everybody who took part in this.
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic resource and also a document, an archive of the time. That Planetary View, also Milo Rao put out that Why Theater, where he asked theater artists around the world to write statements. It is a big work ahead. Frank, a question for you. Are you hopeful that theater will have that impact, or do you think it will be on the streets? Manifestation? Is it people, as Camus said, sitting at home reading a book? Will it be film industry? Do you think theater is at a center of such a movement, or is it part of it?
It's a part in each case, and but I think there is a possibility that it can be very powerful, especially in Germany, where theater has this much big houses and much money. So, but we must develop new forms which are in another way theater, which we don't can see today. There is the idea to make theater in the landscape and to connect in another way with nature. I think it's very important. What is the task of the theater? Yeah. When we look at animals, at plants, at everything in the nature, we think, okay, this is the reality of nature. But we know that if we are in an ancient time, we will look in another way on a river because there is a god of the river. And then if we are Christian people, we look there and there we know there is no God in this river. And when we look with views with the eyes of René Descartes or some others, we think, okay, how we can change this river to make it productive. And now when we look with the eyes of the Anthropocene, we see, okay, this is very difficult with this river. Tomorrow it can kill us, or he's full of poison, whatever. So I want to say, behind our viewpoints, there are many, many history decisions, and we must put them on the surface. We must understand that we, in a way, cultural relatives. This is a relativity, and that there is no, in this sense, reality, but there is many sediments of culture, history, and theater has to bring it out, to bring it on the surface, so that that is like a theory of alienation, yes, that Brecht say, okay, what we think, what is normal, what is naturally, in reality, it's historical, and we must bring this historical attitude to nature on the stage, that we understand ourselves better, and then we can better navigate or make decisions. Yeah.
And
Latour says nature is absolutely artistic, because in the nature is not one complete thing. It's always a process of many decisions in the nature too, and developments. And of course, in our cultural history, it's the same thing. And we must try to bring it together, or we will fail.
We will fail, yeah. And perhaps it is a hope that theater can play a new role, perhaps gain additional meaning. It had lost perhaps in the pop culture of the significance compared to television, film, and music. And I think it's perhaps a way back door, as Kleist said, the way back into paradise. There might be a door open, and that theater can help us to at least see it, experiencing and to experience it. I remember us talking about Humboldt and theater and Goethe, that Humboldt and Goethe were friends. And I think before Humboldt went on his long 3 or 4 year Latin American journey, where he then wrote his entire life about, and he also, I think, had a planetary view. He wrote about the cosmos as well as about the plants and the beetles and everything. And Goethe said to him, and you can list up all the stones with Latin names in alphabets and put them in boxes. You can, give names to all the plants you find and dry them and bring the leaves. People will not understand what nature will be in Chile, where he thought he thought Latin America was the center of the earth. He said, people will not do it. You will have to describe the sunset or the sunrise, your view on the forest. And Humboldt became the first travel journalist in a way and invented that idea of nature. And I think theater may also be something that connects that scientific discoveries and the real of the world, but in a way that mankind will understand, connect it, feel it, and perhaps that is also what is missing. I really would like to thank both of you. Yeah, please.
To Humboldt. And he discovered the principle now of the Anthropocene, because he said everything is connected to everything. And that's now exactly our problem now, yes, that we can separate the spheres and the landscapes and everything. So we must learn with this systematic view or a systemic view to describe our reality.
Yeah, and there has to be a symbiosis, or there will be a death, as you quoted Michel Serres. And I think that is a very serious crisis. And I think also we all in the theater have to acknowledge that, and we have to confront this terrible, terrifying, tragic state of the world. And we have to bring it on the stage and communicate it.
Because this is, how you say, it's very heavy stuff, heavy themes. And we need a place for this heavy themes. This is not in the pop culture or in the TV. This is not a TV stuff. This is really tragedy, pathos, hubris, everything. But we are dealing about our future and the future of our children. And this is a very, very difficult situation for the whole mankind of the globus. And so we have to deal with it in a new way to handle it.
And I think as artists and theorists of theater, we have to learn to prepare ourselves and prepare our readers, our audiences to transform ourselves and themselves. We have to be open for this transformation that the new theater will allow in order to move forward. Because yes, this is very heavy stuff, and these are very difficult and dangerous times we live in, and we must make a point of changing, because honestly, that's the only way forward.
Yeah. It is really, really interesting. Also, Heiner Müller said using Brecht without criticizing him or putting it in a new form is treason. I think also theater people have said now producing theater without having that kind of galactic global view is treason to the great basic idea of what art and civilization has been or should be. And we have to engage with it and also interpret the classics in a way that is respectful to this new shocking realization of the Anthropocene age which we entered. And I agree, and I think we have to relook at, and this little way out, the Dionysius Reloaded, as Frank said, there is something that we have to adapt to. We're going to have Aiko, the Japanese dancer who's based in New York, who created that book, A Body in Fukushima, with us, where she's dealing with a result perhaps of that Apollonial, more theoretical age. For 800 years or 1,000 years, that landscape will be contaminated. People will not be able to get in. And she went into the demarcation line where you could go in or not, that is deserted railroad stations, the stores, the streets where the grass is coming and where the concrete is blooming. And so we will also see the seriousness again of this. We had fantastic writers with that, Bonnie Maranka, Teresa Smalek on Ron Water, Alexis Green, Emily Mann, Carrie Perloff, and Catania, great workers in the theater who perhaps in this Holocene age, in the golden age of theater, created work for decades and interpreted this theater as it was needed for the time. But now we have that new age coming in, and that was, I thought this book is so important as highlighting this. And Avra was also a Segal Center scholar, though we knew each other. So I think it's an important comment and should be taken serious also as the concept of it itself. So thank you both to our readers. I hope you have listeners. We have time for next Monday, December 20th, to join us with Aiko, who's in Japan. She actually flew to Japan and sits still in a hotel room. I think it's 14 days of quarantine before she can come out, and she will talk about her work, her little essays, a beautiful writing about that shock, that Fukushima catastrophe. And I think also Richard Schechner said here in the program, quoting a friend, that what we are looking at now at the time of Corona, a nuclear reactor explosion, but the roof is off. We look at inside in real time, and we have to react, and we have to prepare us, as Avra said, and also our audiences and future generations of it. And we have a responsibility as theater artists. So thank you both. Thanks to HowlRound for hosting us. Avra, I apologize. It's impossible to get it all in from your book. And Frank, your center alone, your initiative is worth 3 talks. And I hope maybe there will be ways of collaborating or bringing you over here once it's possible. It's easier. We still don't know if we will have public programs next spring. It looked yes, but now we are very worried. Cornell University, 900 students got infected just 2 days ago or 3 days ago. They're going to close down the entire campus. So we don't know what really will happen, but I'm proud that we are part of that global sphere and that we exchanged our ideas. It's very important to hear from you, and to HowlRound. Thanks to Vijay and to Thea for hosting us, and to our listeners who stuck with us, and also, was listening to all the contributors and their names and what they wrote about. It is important, and if there's ever a time in the time of Corona, perhaps we listen a little bit more so we can hear better. Thank you all, and thanks again to everybody who tuned in. And one day we'll all see each other, Frank and Avra, and over a cup of coffee. A lunch, and keep us and Theater Center in mind. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
You so much.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.